The Earldom of Pembroke is a title in the Peerage of England that was first created in the 12th century by King Stephen of England. The title, which is associated with Pembroke, Pembrokeshire in West Wales, has been recreated 10 times from its original inception, with each creation beginning with a new first earl. The original seat of Pembroke Castle is no longer attached to the title. The current holder of the earldom is William Herbert, 18th Earl of Pembroke, which is the 10th creation of the title. For the past 400 years, his family's seat has been Wilton House, Wiltshire. Since 1605, the Earls of Pembroke have also held the title Earl of Montgomery. This was created for the younger son of Henry Herbert, 2nd Earl of Pembroke, before he succeeded as the 4th Earl in 1630. The current Earls of Pembroke also carry the subsidiary titles: Baron Herbert of Cardiff in the county of Glamorgan, Baron Herbert of Shirland in the Isle of Sheppey in the county of Kent, and Baron Herbert of Lee in the county of Wilts. All are in the Peerage of England except the Barony of Herbert of Lee, which is in the Peerage of the United Kingdom. On the 1st of September 1533, King Henry VIII created the original Marquisate of Pembroke for his future Queen Anne Boleyn. This honour was in recognition of the king's great-uncle Jasper Tudor, who had been the Earl of Pembroke in the 15th century, and his own father, Henry VII, who was born at Pembroke Castle in January 1457. History. The title of Earl of Pembroke has been held successively by several English families, the jurisdiction and dignity being originally attached to the County Palatine of Pembrokeshire. The first creation dates from 1138, when the Earldom of Pembroke was conferred by King Stephen on Gilbert de Clare, son of Gilbert Fitz-Richard, who possessed the lordship of Strigel, the modern Chepstow. In the Battle of Lincoln, the Earl fought on the side of King Stephen. After the king's defeat, however, he joined the party of the Empress Matilda. Later he became reconciled to Stephen when he recovered his throne. The Earl married Henry I's mistress, Isabel, daughter of Robert de Beaumont, Earl of Leicester. That being said, Arnulf de Montgomery was likely created Earl of Pembroke by William Rufus, decades before Gilbert de Clare. Arnulf himself was rewarded by the king with lordship of Pembroke upon his family's construction of Pembroke Castle in the late 11th century. The first creation, Gilbert de Clare, 1st Earl of Pembroke. Richard de Clare, 2nd Earl of Pembroke. Gilbert de Strigil, 3rd Earl of Pembroke. Isabel de Clare, 4th Countess of Pembroke. Like his father, Richard Gilbert de Clare was a supporter of Stephen, King of England, the last Norman King of England. His opposition to the claims of the French House of Anjou alienated him from the affections of Henry II of England. As a result, on his father's death in 1148, it seems likely that the king refused to recognize Richard's claims to the Earldom of Pembroke. His claim to the lesser lordship of Strigil does not seem to have been challenged. Being effectively disinherited by the king and with mounting debts, Richard welcomed the opportunity to restore his fortunes that presented itself in 1168. In that year, he was chosen to lead a Norman expedition to Ireland in support of Diarmait mac Murchada, the deposed king of Leinster. The Lord of Strigil crossed over in person in 1170, took both Waterford and Dublin, and was married to Diarmaid's daughter Aoife MacMurrough, claiming the kingship of Leinster after Diarmaid's death in 1171. Henry II, wary of his power, stripped Strongbow of his new holdings the same year and invaded Ireland himself in 1171, putting his people in power. Strongbow returned to favour and power in Ireland in 1173 when he aided the king in his campaign against his rebelling sons. He died in 1176 after years of bitter struggle with Irish magnates. Strongbow died with male issue. Gilbert, however, Gilbert being a minor, was not formally invested with either the Earldom of Pembroke or of Strigiel. It is unlikely that his father could have passed on title to Pembroke, as he himself did not possess it. When Gilbert died in 1185, his sister Isabel de Clare became Countess of Pembroke in her own right until her death in 1220. In this way, she could be said to be the first successor to the Earldom of Pembroke since her grandfather Gilbert the first Earl. By this reckoning, Isabel ought to be called the second Countess, not the fourth Countess of Pembroke. In any event, the title Earl was recreated for her husband as her consort, the famous Sir William Marshal, son of John the Marshal, by Isabel, the sister of Patrick, Earl of Salisbury. The second creation, Marshal William Marshal, 1st Earl of Pembroke, William Marshal, 2nd Earl of Pembroke, Richard Marshal, 3rd Earl of Pembroke, Gilbert Marshal, 4th Earl of Pembroke, Walter Marshal, 5th Earl of Pembroke, Anselm Marshal, 6th Earl of Pembroke. In August 1189, at the age of 43, William Marshal, held by many to be the greatest knight in Christendom, was given the hand of Isabel de Clare and, in 1199, was created the first Earl of Pembroke by King John. Although he had previously served Richard's father, Henry II, against Richard's rebellions, Richard confirmed the old king's license for his marriage with the heiress of Strigiel and Pembroke. He served Richard and John loyally, defending the latter against the French and English rebel barons in the First Barons' War. He was present at the signing of the Magna Carta in 1215. Upon John's death in 1216, the 70-year-old Marshal was named regent of the kingdom and protector of the young king, Henry III. He defeated the rebels and the French allies, and reissued the Magna Carta in order to secure the peace. He fell ill early in 1219 and died on the 14th of May at his manor of Caversham near Reading. He was succeeded in the regency by Hubert de Burgh, and in his earldom by his 5 sons in succession. Marshal's eldest son, William Marshal, 2nd Earl of Pembroke of this line, passed some years in warfare in Wales and Ireland, where he was justiciar from 1224 to 1226. He also served Henry III in France. His second wife was the king's sister, Eleanor, who later married Simon de Montfort, but he left no children. His brother Richard Marshal, 3rd Earl, came to the fore as the leader of the baronial party, and chief antagonist of the foreign friends of Henry III. Fearing treachery, he refused to visit the king at Gloucester in August 1233, and Henry declared him a traitor. He crossed to Ireland, where Peter des Roches had instigated his enemies to attack him, and in April 1234, he was overpowered and wounded, and died a prisoner. His brother Gilbert, who became the 4th Earl, was a friend and ally of Richard, Earl of Cornwall. When another brother, Anselm, the 6th Earl, died in December 1245, the male descendants of the great Earl Marshal became extinct. The extensive family possessions were now divided among Anselm's 5 sisters and the descendants, the Earldom of Pembroke reverting to the crown. The third creation, de Valence, William de Valence, 1st Earl of Pembroke, Aymer de Valence, 2nd Earl of Pembroke. The next holder of the lands of the Earldom of Pembroke was William de Valence, a younger son of Hugh de Lusignan, Count of La Marche, by his marriage with Isabella of Angoulême, widow of the English King John. In 1247, William, along with 2 of his brothers, moved from France to England, where their half-brother, Henry III, was king. The king married William to Joan de Montchensey, a granddaughter and heiress to the great William Marshal, 1st Earl of Pembroke. Valence was granted custody of the lands and the title of Earl of Pembroke, giving him great wealth and power in his new land. As a result, he was unpopular, and was heavily involved in the Second Barons' War. supporting the king and Prince Edward against the rebels led by Simon de Montfort. After the final defeat of the rebels at the Battle of Evesham in 1265, William continued to serve Henry III, and then Edward I, until his death in 1296. William's eldest surviving son, Aymer, succeeded to his father's estates, but was not formally recognised as Earl of Pembroke until after the death of his mother Joan in 1307. He was appointed Guardian of Scotland in 1306, but with the accession of Edward II to the throne and the consequent rise of Piers Gaveston to power, his influence declined. He became prominent among the discontented nobles, but in 1312, after the Earl of Warwick betrayed him by executing the captured Gaveston, he left the allied lords and joined the king. Valence was present at Bannockburn in 1314, and later helped King Edward defeat Thomas of Lancaster. However, by his death in 1324, he was again marginalised at court, and in financial trouble as well. His wife, Mary de Chatillon, a descendant of King Henry III, was the founder of Pembroke College, Cambridge. The fourth creation. Hastings, Lawrence Hastings, 1st Earl of Pembroke. John Hastings, 2nd Earl of Pembroke. John Hastings, 3rd Earl of Pembroke. Lawrence, a great-grandson of William de Valence, was created, or recognised as, Earl of Pembroke, having inherited a portion of the estates of the Valence Earls of Pembroke. His son John married Margaret, daughter of King Edward III, and on the death without issue of his grandson in 1389, the Earldom of Pembroke reverted again to the crown. The fifth creation. Plantagenet Humphrey of Lancaster, 1st Duke of Gloucester. Humphrey, the fourth son of King Henry IV, was created Duke of Gloucester and Earl of Pembroke for life, these titles being subsequently made hereditary, with a reversion as regards the Earldom of Pembroke, in default of heirs to Humphrey, to William de la Pole, 1st Duke of Suffolk. The sixth creation. Pole William de la Pole, 1st Duke of Suffolk. On the death of Humphrey without legitimate issue in 1447, William de la Pole became Earl of Pembroke. He was beheaded in 1450 and his titles were forfeited. The seventh creation. Tudor Jasper Tudor, 1st Duke of Bedford. Sir Jasper Tudor was the half-brother of King Henry VI. Being a Lancastrian, his title was forfeited for 24 years during the predominance of the House of York. The eighth creation. Herbert William Herbert, 1st Earl of Pembroke. William Herbert, 2nd Earl of Pembroke. Following Jasper Tudor's attainder, Sir William Herbert, a zealous Yorkist, was raised to the peerage as Baron Herbert by Edward IV. Herbert took the Lancastrian Jasper Tudor prisoner during the Civil War. For this service, he was created Earl of Pembroke in 1468. Perhaps mindful of its earlier Tudor holder, the second Earl surrendered his title to Edward IV 10 years after acceding and received in lieu the Earldom of Huntingdon. The ninth creation. House of York. Edward Plantagenet. In 1479, Edward IV conferred the title on his son, Edward, Prince of Wales. When this prince succeeded to the throne as Edward V of England, the Earldom of Pembroke merged in the crown. Following the defeat of the House of York, the earldom were restored to the Tudors with the accession of Henry VII. Marquess of Pembroke, and Anne Boleyn, on the 1st of September 1532, a few months prior to her marriage to Henry VIII, and was granted the Marquessate of Pembroke. She was found guilty of treason and executed in May 1536, at which point the title became either forfeit or extinct at her death without male children. The 10th creation. Herbert. The title was next revived in favour of Sir William Herbert, whose father, Richard, was an illegitimate son of the 1st Earl of Pembroke of the House of Herbert. He had married Anne Parr, sister of Henry VIII's sixth wife, Catherine Parr, and was created Earl in 1551. The title has since been held by his descendants: William Herbert, 1st Earl of Pembroke; Henry Herbert, 2nd Earl of Pembroke; William Herbert, 3rd Earl of Pembroke; Philip Herbert, 4th Earl of Pembroke, 1st Earl of Montgomery; Philip Herbert, 5th Earl of Pembroke, 2nd Earl of Montgomery; William Herbert, 6th Earl of Pembroke, 3rd Earl of Montgomery; Philip Herbert, 7th Earl of Pembroke, 4th Earl of Montgomery; Thomas Herbert, 8th Earl of Pembroke, 5th Earl of Montgomery; Henry Herbert, 9th Earl of Pembroke, 6th Earl of Montgomery; Henry Herbert, 10th Earl of Pembroke, 7th Earl of Montgomery; George Augustus Herbert, 11th Earl of Pembroke, 8th Earl of Montgomery; Robert Henry Herbert, 12th Earl of Pembroke, 9th Earl of Montgomery; George Robert Charles Herbert, 13th Earl of Pembroke, 10th Earl of Montgomery; Sidney Herbert, 14th Earl of Pembroke, 11th Earl of Montgomery; Reginald Herbert, 15th Earl of Pembroke, 12th Earl of Montgomery; Sidney Charles Herbert, 16th Earl of Pembroke, 13th Earl of Montgomery; Henry George Charles Alexander Herbert, 17th Earl of Pembroke, 14th Earl of Montgomery; William Alexander Sidney Herbert, 18th Earl of Pembroke, 15th Earl of Montgomery. The heir apparent is the present holder's son Reginald Henry Michael Herbert, Lord Herbert, an executor of Henry VIII's will and the recipient of valuable grants of land. Herbert was a prominent and powerful personage during the reign of Edward VI, both the Protector Somerset and his rival, John Dudley, afterwards Duke of Northumberland. Angling for his support, he threw in his lot with Dudley, and after Somerset's fall obtained some of his lands in Wiltshire and a peerage. It has been asserted that he devised the scheme for settling the English crown on Lady Jane Grey. At all events, he was one of her advisers during her short reign, but he declared for Mary when he saw that Lady Jane's cause was lost by Mary and her friends. Pembroke's loyalty was at times suspected, but he was employed as governor of Calais, as president of Wales, and in other ways. He was also to some extent in the confidence of Philip II of Spain. The Earl retained his place at court under Elizabeth until 1569, when he was suspected of favouring the projected marriage between Mary, Queen of Scots, and the Duke of Norfolk. Among the monastic lands granted to Herbert was the estate of Wilton, near Salisbury, still the residence of the Earls of Pembroke. His elder son Henry, who succeeded as second Earl, was President of Wales from 1586 until his death. He married in 1577 Mary Sidney, the famous Countess of Pembroke, third daughter of Sir Henry Sidney and his wife Mary Dudley. Sir Philip Sidney, to whom she was deeply attached through life, was her eldest brother. Sir Philip Sidney spent the summer of 1580 with her at Wilton, or at Ivy Church, a favourite retreat of hers in the neighbourhood. Here, at her request, he began the Countesses of Pembroke's Arcadia, which was intended for her pleasure alone, not for publication. The two also worked at a metrical edition of the Psalms. When the great sorrow of her brother's death came upon her, she made herself his literary executor, correcting the unauthorized editions of the Arcadia and of his poems, which appeared in 1590 and 1591. She also took under her patronage the poets who had looked to her brother for protection. Spenser dedicated his Ruins of Time to her, and refers to her as Urania in Colin Clout's Come Home Again. In Spenser's Astroneful she is Clorinda. In 1599 Queen Elizabeth was her guest at Wilton, and the Countess composed for the occasion a pastoral dialogue in praise of Astraea. After her husband's death she lived chiefly in London at Crosby Hall, where she died. The Countess's other works include A discoursive life and death, translated from the French of Plessis du Morny and Antoine, a version of a tragedy of Robert Garnier. She is one of the handful of people whom certain scholars conjecture may have been the true author of the plays attributed to William Shakespeare. Robin Williams' book, Sweet Swan of Avon, published by Wilton Circle Press, USA, documents the Countess's fascinating life as well as those of her two sons. William Herbert, 3rd Earl of Pembroke, eldest son of the 2nd Earl and his famous Countess, was a conspicuous figure in the society of his time and at the court of James I. Several times he found himself opposed to the schemes of the Duke of Buckingham, and he was keenly interested in the colonization of America. He was Lord Chamberlain of the royal household from 1615 to 1625 and Lord Steward from 1626 to 1630. He was Chancellor of the University of Oxford in 1624 when Thomas Tesdale and Richard Whitewick refounded Broadgates Hall and named it Pembroke College in his honour. By some Shakespearean commentators, Pembroke has been identified with the Mr. W.H. referred to as the only begetter of Shakespeare's sonnets in the dedication by Thomas Thorpe, the owner of the published manuscript, while his mistress, Mary Fitton, has been identified with the Dark Lady of the Sonnets. In both cases the identification rests on very questionable evidence. He and his brother Philip are the incomparable pair of brethren, to whom the first folio of Shakespeare is inscribed. The Earl left no sons when he died in London on the 10th of April 1630. Clarendon gives a very eulogistic account of Pembroke, who appears, however, to have been a man of weak character and dissolute life. Gardner describes him as the Hamlet of the English court. He had literary tastes and wrote poems. One of his closest friends was the poet Donne, and he was generous to Ben Jonson, Massinger and others. His brother, Philip Herbert, 4th Earl of Pembroke, was for some years the chief favourite of James I, owing this position to his comely person and his passion for hulking and for field sports generally. In 1605 King James I of England created him Earl of Montgomery and Baron Herbert of Shurland, and since 1630, when he succeeded to the Earldom of Pembroke, the head of the Herbert family has carried the double title of Earl of Pembroke and Montgomery. Although Philip's quarrelsome disposition often led him into trouble, he did not forfeit the esteem of James I, who heaped lands and offices upon him, and he was also trusted by Charles I, who made him Lord Chamberlain in 1626 and frequently visited him at Wilton. He worked to bring about peace between the king and the Scots in 1639 and 1640, but when in the latter year the quarrel between Charles and the English Parliament was renewed, he deserted the king, who soon deprived him of his office of Chamberlain. Trusted by the popular party, Pembroke was made governor of the Isle of Wight, and he was one of the representatives of the Parliament on several occasions, notably during the negotiations at Uxbridge in 1645 and at Newport in 1648, and when the Scots surrendered Charles in 1647. From 1641 to 1643, and again from 1647 to 1650, he was Chancellor of the University of Oxford. In 1648 he removed some of the heads of houses from the positions because they would not take the Solemn League and Covenant, and his foul language led to the remark that he was more fitted by his eloquence in swearing to preside over Bedlam than a learned academy. In 1649, although a peer, he was elected and took his seat in the House of Commons as member for Berkshire. This ascent downwards calling forth many satirical writings from the royalist wits. The Earl was a great collector of pictures and had some taste for architecture. His eldest surviving son, Philip, became 5th Earl of Pembroke, and 2nd Earl of Montgomery. He was twice married, and was succeeded in turn by 3 of his sons, of whom Thomas, the 8th Earl, was a person of note during the reigns of William III and Anne. From 1690 to 1692 he was First Lord of the Admiralty, then he served as Lord Privy Seal until 1699, being in 1697 the first plenipotentiary of Great Britain at the Congress of Ryswick. On 2 occasions he was Lord High Admiral for a short period. He was also Lord President of the Council and Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, while he acted as one of the Lords Justices 7 times, and he was President of the Royal Society in 1689 to 1690. His son Henry, the 9th Earl, was a soldier, but was better known as the architect Earl. Quote, "He was largely responsible for the erection of Westminster Bridge." The title descended directly to Henry, 10th Earl, a soldier, who wrote The Method of Breaking Horses. George Augustus, 11th Earl, an ambassador extraordinary to Vienna in 1807. Robert Henry, 12th Earl, died in France without issue and was buried in the Père Lachaise cemetery in Paris. George Robert Charles, the 13th Earl, was a grandson of the 10th Earl and a son of Baron Herbert of Le, whose second son Sidney inherited all the family titles at his brother's death. Arms of the Earldoms of Hastings. Other use. The city of Pembroke Pines, Florida, is thought to have been named after the Earl of Pembroke, an early landowner in Broward County. Pembroke, New Hampshire, was named after the 9th Earl by Governor Benning Wentworth. Pembroke, Kentucky, was not named for any of the Earls of Pembroke as is sometimes claimed, but for the character of Pembroke Somerset, who appeared in the popular 1803 novel Thaddeus of Warsaw, which described the 1790s uprisings in Poland. There is an all-male dorm on the campus of Belmont University in Nashville, Tennessee, Pembroke Hall, that is named after the city, as an original trustee of the building was from the city.